high school and the college level. And I don't want to take any time away from him, so I'm going to turn it over to him right away.
Wow, that's a lot. Can you hear me, Chuck?
I can hear you.
All right. Sarah, when did you get a pianist that come in,
Oh, Mary Jo.
or, I'm sorry, Mary Jo, I didn't know he was the pianist here.
Well,
Is he new?
somehow he's here.
Yeah.
Just out of nowhere. He's
Jared
great.
plays
He's
for me
great.
every time we sponsor the Women's Purdue
Yes.
banquet. He is fantastic.
Yeah.
That's why-
Yeah. That'll cost you $1.
Okay. It's good to see all of you. I've got a professor here, 100 years old, Sam Posterwaite. I had in botany. I see Jim Leslie. He didn't say that I coached his son in collegiate baseball. And I've got quite a few insureds out here too, so it's good to see all of you here. I'll give you a little background of how I got started in officiating, and then I'll throw out some stories, and if you have questions, don't hesitate in asking.
Keep the mic up close.
Can you hear me better?
Yeah.
All right, sorry. When I was in high school playing basketball, I enjoyed, obviously, the sport, but Johnny Ward from Brookston, whose farm is right there by before you come into Brookston, and then Johnny Fee. And they sort of took me under their wings. And I would go work a JV basketball game with them, and I got a hamburger and a milkshake. Because back then, the officials were to work both the JV and the varsity games. So that's how I got my start. And then it wasn't long after that, that you take Benton Central. Anybody from Benton Central here? I don't know how many schools make up that, but 7 or 8. Well, there was 7 or 8 varsity games you could pick up. And it's that way all over, because back then the consolidations were not prevalent.
Right.
Well, I was told by Johnny and Johnny, both of them worked the state finals, that you need to travel. So one night I might be in Michigan City, the next night I might be in New Albany or something like that, for a whopping probably $50 at that time. So it really didn't make ends meet, but I had a dream that someday I wanted to work Big Ten basketball. And I just kept after it, and back then, all the universities played freshman basketball. Well, I happened to be working that at Purdue, and Herm Rorik, who was supervisor of officials in the Big Ten, was there. And afterwards, he come in, he introduced himself, and he said, "You have a desire to work Big Ten basketball?" Obviously, I did. He said, "Continue to send me your schedule. I'll let you know when you're ready. Don't call me." So I did. And my dad and I, one day, were gone. We come back in the State Farm office there in Brookston, which my dad had at that time, and there was a call from Herm Roy. Well, it was 9, 10 o'clock at night. I certainly wasn't going to call him then. So I couldn't wait to call him next morning. And he said to me, he said, "I told you when I thought you'd be ready. I'm going to give you some games." Well, back then, the Big Ten assigned for DePaul, you know, all these schools, Loyola, Notre Dame, all of them. And that was sort of like a training ground. Well, I wouldn't want you running out here telling some of those university coaches that the Big Ten used them as a training ground. But what happened, they would rate those officials working there, and whoever was rated the top 3 that year would move on to the Big Ten staff. And those that maybe lacked some ratings, they were dropped. So that's how I got my shot. And my first game in the Big Ten was Purdue at Iowa. It so happened that one of the officials got hurt, and Herm Rorik called me and said, "You meet Charlie Foudy." And probably some of you remember Charlie Foudy. he said, you meet him and go to Iowa. Well, Charlie would not fly, small plane or anything else. No way. So he called me, and he lived in Terre Haute. He was a banker there. And he said, boy, he said, bring 4 cigars. I'm going to meet you at New Joy Restaurant in Kentland. We're going to drive to Iowa, and we're going to drive home. So that was my indoctrination into working a Big Ten basketball game. And that was not fun that night because it was the old Hawkeye Arena. You had to walk through what I would call their Iowa Hawkeye Club. And that was not a pretty sight. I can tell you some of the language there. Gary, where's right? You wouldn't like that. You wouldn't like that.
I lived right near Iowa City. I attended some of those games.
Right. Yeah. But so that's how I got my good start in officiating. From then on, I was in the Big Ten for 23 years. Very, very fortunate. And I have been a lot of places, worked a lot of tournaments. Probably one of the greatest games I ever had was when Bobby Hurley and Jason Kidd played against each other in the NCAA tournament. I had it at Chicago. And I'm telling you, I thought it was the state finals of the high school, because half the crowd was for California and half of it was for Duke. After the game, we're down in the bottom of the center there at Chicago, and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door, and I thought, there can't be anybody coming down here because they have security, they can't get close to you. So I was about half dressed, went over to the door, and lo and behold, it was Krzyzewski. What are you doing here? Because that probably is not going to be positive. He said, guys, we were number 1 in the nation, undefeated, we just got beat, you worked a great game, and left. Not many coaches would do that, especially after they just got knocked out of the NCAA tournament or something like that. But I've been to Alaska, I've been to Puerto Rico. You were talking about my office. That's where a lot of my things came from. When I would get into a city, I would always, if I wasn't flying, and that's how I got to work so many games. I had my own plane, but the Purdue students flew me all the time. So I could lay back there and sleep, land back at Purdue, or we kept it at Crawfordsville because the aviation fuel was so much cheaper. I'd come back, stop at the office 2 or 3 in the morning, see what went on, come back in, and be ready to go. But some of the Santa Clauses that I have in my office, we went to the North Pole that morning real early and went up there, and we saw the Eskimos making these, and some of it's real mink fur or something like that. So I put those 2 in my office. Now, every Christmas, the Mary Kay ladies come by and talk to my staff about buying a Santa Claus for Christmas. So that's how we got so many. Big Ten was great to me, I can tell you that. And I know all of you are sitting out there wanting to ask me about night, and I'll fire some stories at you or something like that. When I decided to get out, the MAC and the Mid-Con had offered me the position of being the assigner for those conferences. And I thought, you know what, that might be easier. Was I ever wrong? If I give somebody 50 games, they were mad because they didn't get 51. If in a 3-man crew, if they weren't throwing the jump ball up, they were upset about it. It wasn't worth it, I can tell you. Then, let me check my audience here. Okay, then, another thing, you were dealing with the ADs, you would deal with the college presidents. They would ask me, as the assigner, how many African American officials do you have? I wasn't afraid to tell them. I had plenty, because I had a lot of good friends that were good officials. How many of them worked good games? Then we stopped. I said, you tell me what a good game is. Every game is good. I don't care if it's who's playing. Every game could be an upset. So that was pretty discouraging as a supervisor, when you had higher ups like that asking those type of questions, which don't even make sense. But getting into the Big Ten play and all, a lot of tough games. One of the toughest places to work as an official was Minnesota in the old barn up there. Because if all of you have seen that, there's several different levels. And the thing, they're like the Purdue Creamery, only they have the ice cream place in the bottom of the gymnasium. And as officials, we'd always want to go in there and get it first. But I'm telling you, if you did not have a good first half, you were probably going to shower at halftime. Because those students and fans would hold their ice cream cones and grip them on you, and you were walking off. And more than once, we took a shower at halftime. It was crazy like that. Katie was a tough bulldog. I can tell you that right now. But he was fair. Katie would forget it after the game was over. The guy Sal never forgot. His mind was running 24 hours a day. I can remember when we had they always had the tournaments there, Christmas tournaments and sometimes Thanksgiving tournaments. And it was always 3 mods playing, Indiana. They're going to win by whatever. He would tell us, he would make a point to tell us, I do not want a technical foul on those coaches. I had to pay them so much money to get them here because nobody wants to come because they're not going to win. And he was adamant about that. I remember one time a coach got on me pretty good and I couldn't tech him. I just said, Coach, I've got that one in my pocket. I'll see you next week. And he backed off pretty quick then. But I could always tell when Knight was upset with me on a call because he'd give me a shot about Purdue or you better watch what Purdue's doing today or something like that. No, I never did have a technical foul, but what incensed him more than anything was the fact if you would tech one of his kids. That was bad. That poor kid got ripped. We had one of those tournament games, and Indiana should have won by 20, 30 points. A last-second tip-in, give them the championship game in their 4-way tournament. We're in the showering, and Knight comes in there and said, put your clothes on. The game's over, Coach. I said, put your clothes on. As soon as these people clear out of here, you're going to work another game. I'm going to give you full pay. I'm telling you, I felt so sorry for those players because it was pure hell for about 15 minutes. He would not let up on them. It was just awful. When he got his point across, okay. I never did see the game fee though. But talking about that, many years ago, you would have the Big Ten teams go to different high schools around. Maybe they wanted to recruit a kid or something like that, so they would play a game there. And a lot of times, familiar place was Fort Wayne Coliseum. Well, Showalter and Muncie and I went up there to work a Indiana scrimmage. And pretty good crowd. And before the game, Knight says to us, he said, I want you guys to give the officials a hand. And he brought us out on the floor and introduced us, and he said, now really give them a hand because they just donated their check to my library fund. We never did get the money. Again, I didn't get a tax write-off either. I should have asked him about that. Knight obviously was intense. And there was one time we were working a practice game down there, and that's when Alfred was playing. And I don't know what he was upset about or anything else. And he called Alfred over to him, said, Steve, get over here. And Steve got about as close as Sam and I. And Knight hit him right square in the head with a basketball. Today, you couldn't get over with it. what did Steve do? Nothing. Turned around and left. But that's how intense he could be. I was working a baseball game at IU, and somebody must have tipped Knight off that I was going to be umpiring that day. About the second or third inning, he come out there, and you talk about putting on a show towards me. I mean, the fans were going crazy. All the things he was yelling at me, and when he thought all the fans had enough, that he left. But there was one time, what time do we have to
Yeah, there's.
Okay.
I got you still
play?
15.
There was one time I had a game at IU, and obviously Bobby and Nancy were divorced. And I'm standing out there, I don't know if I was the ref or you one, you two, it doesn't matter. I was across the floor, and I look up, here comes Nancy Knight across the floor right at me. I'm thinking, what is going on? Because, you know, however many fans there, they're all looking at that. What's she doing going over and talking to Eric Harmon? Well, she gets there, and she hands me a note. I said, gee, what are you doing? I stuck it in my pocket, and I get in there at halftime, and it's her check ledger with all of her information on there, because Bobby would not give her any tickets for the away games. So she thought if I had an away game, she could get my 2 tickets, because we get 2 for each game. Well, Chuck Crabb, whose relatives are from Monticello, Chuck is a sports information director there. I get a call probably 7 o'clock in the morning at my office. Chuck says, what was that all about? And I told him, and he said, well, let me give you some advice. I probably, if I wanted to continue to be a Big Ten official, I probably would not take her up on that. I still have it in my desk from 30 years ago. But no, there was no way I was going to do that. But sometimes you get in predicaments, like, you know, you don't put yourself there, but the fans or somebody else did. Now, did I ask somebody about Walt Valentine?
Yeah.
Okay. Walt saved my life, probably. I had Purdue at Ohio State, and my mother was going to fly with me, and the weather was so bad, and those Purdue students said, I probably wouldn't do it, but they were still going to fly me. So they flew me over there, and when I got to the Columbus airport, an FBI agent always picks me up there because he wants my tickets. He's friends of Chuck Altman, who used to run the Farm Progress show there in Chalmers. So he picks me up, and we walk into the arena, and I see this battery of men coming at me. What in the world's going on here? And I said, are you Eric Harmon? I said, yeah. I said, we need to talk to you. And I thought, you know, what tragic thing has happened? So I get in there, and they said, well, let me tell you, we've had a death threat on you. And I brought all these FBI agents in here because they're fully armed, all of them see you. And we've notified the FBI agent back in Lafayette, because he's checking your phone lines, also where my 3 daughters were, and my wife. So he knew all that before I even knew something. Well, I was working with Tommy Rucker, and a lot of you remember Chico, Tommy Rucker. Well, when all these FBI guys walked in there with me, he heard what was going on. And Tommy was laying on the floor, exercising, stretching. He jumped up and said to the FBI agents, do they know the difference between a black and a white? And every once in a while I'll hear from Tommy, and I'll always remind him of that. But I tell you, that was tough refereeing that day. Well, first of all, where I was lined up that day when they introduced the people, they had to tell both coaches what was going on, and that the FBI was calling the crowd and this and that. I'm standing there, and Katie's right behind me. He said, Harmon, would you move your A because if they shoot and miss, they're gonna get me. I said, thanks a lot, Coach. Well, they made me put a flak jacket on. And I had to call the commissioner. I said, this game isn't that important to me. But they made me do that. Well, that's 20-some pounds. And you're running up and down that floor and sweating. And I'm telling you, every time I saw a fan jump up to clap, to cheer, I caught myself done. Thank goodness it was over with. And they took me back out to the plane. The FBI checked the plane out, everything like that. And when I landed back at Lafayette, there was Walt Ballantyne there, waiting. And I told the guys, I said, you cannot be fooling around with my phones, making wise remarks, because they have them tapped. To this day, they had no idea what caused that death threat. They went back and looked at my previous games to see if there's any controversial calls or maybe something made the difference in a game or something like that, and they could not find anything. So today it wouldn't have happened because with the sophistication of all the different systems, they would know right where it come from. Their only bet was they thought it might have come out of Michigan. Who knows? I do not know. But I know one thing, I was glad that night was over with because I didn't know anything. So I walked in there and there's all these FBI agents. So, why don't some of you ask me some questions? All right, Jim?
Yes. Every time you get your start in umpiring baseball, what was your interest in doing that? Did you ever have the desire to move on up to play umpire professional baseball?
I really didn't because I had a good job with State Farm. And if I were a professional umpire, my State Farm career would be over with. But that was the first license that I had. It was baseball over basketball and then football. In fact, you would like this. Last week I was in Toledo for the American Legion National Regional Tournament there. And of course I had his son in Legion Ball when we went a long ways, had very good teams. But now, I worked the the Cubs White Sox series several times when they used to have the Windy City Classic. I had the opportunity to work that, and how that happened, I was working a Saturday TV game, and the Chicago White Sox general manager was Dan Evans. Well, his wife was our TV coordinator for the Big Ten, and she come over before the game and said, my husband, who I didn't even know at that time, says that you umpire Big Ten baseball, and he wondered if you would be willing to work the Cubs Sox series. And didn't take long to say yes on that. And I did that about 7 or 8 times and probably worked the plate 5 times. I've got a picture on, I would get umpteen passes for the game, and they were all access passes. Well, one trip up there, I took a bunch of State Farmers from the regional office, and they were out on the field and every place else. If they wanted some chewing tobacco, they'd go here. If they wanted a hot dog, they'd go here. Anyway, when the game was over, they wanted to know what I was going to do, the lineup cards. I said, here, you can have them. Well, they put a collage together, and I've got it in the office. I'm behind the plate. Carlton Fisk is catching. Ryan Sandberg is swinging the bat. And on the back, these guys, now remind me, I took them, didn't cost them a thing. 2 Hall of Famers, third one meaning me, no. I said, thanks a lot, guys. So, Roy?
What are some of the new rules in football and basketball?
Well, I'm not at liberty really to talk about that yet because they haven't had the rules meetings for basketball. So I better, now I know this, there's not going to be many adjustments or anything like that because they've got a pretty good thing. Football, probably one of the major things in football is this blind side block. They're tired of injuries and things like that. So there's a big emphasis on targeting. And that's why last year Purdue had a couple players, they went in with their helmet, got thrown out. And the problem is you gotta set out at least a portion of the game. And basketball is getting that way too. Basketball is getting so physical because these guys are so big and so strong. So they're putting more emphasis on hand checking, rough post play and all that, trying to clean up the game and make it a more fluid game so, the players can show their ability. But they'll tweak a few things, but not many. And every once in a while, it's not working. And during the season, when I was working, they would switch something during the season because whatever they thought was going to work was not what they were wanting, or something like that. Yes.
I spent a number of years filming the basketball team at Purdue, and I was there in Bloomington that night when Bobby threw the chair. And the only regret was that I wasn't running the camera at the time.
Yeah.
But I was up in the camera deck and I watched it.
One of those was my good friend Fred Jaspers, who's now passed away. He threw the chair. But I happened to be working at Michigan State that night, and I stopped in at Fort Wayne to meet Gary Muncie to go up there. And we ran in the bar there at the Holiday Inn just to see what the score was. And about that time there went that chair flying across it. I'm telling you, Gary Muncie had that bar going crazy because he was imitating Knight and then all this and that. I mean, they give him a standing ovation.
They did. When he walked off the floor,
Yeah.
he had to go to from where he was at the bench to the locker room was exactly the path with the chair.
Mm-hmm.
And he walked right past, I can't remember the name of our kid that was at the free throw line, waiting to throw his free throw.
I forget now who it was.
And I walked right past him and the fans just went absolute bananas.
Yeah. I had Knight the very next game at Minnesota.
Oh, boy.
He called me over. He said, look at all this media here. He said, they must think I'm crazy. He didn't do a thing that night. Did not move. There was one other time, I'll get you some. I was working at Minnesota, and I'm just getting off the plane to go to the University of Minnesota. Here comes Knight and his entourage through there. They were going hunting or fishing. Now, you know how busy an airport is, a walkway. He stops me. He's coming this way, I'm going that. He stops me and wants to demonstrate a block and a charge. And I mean, everybody in the airport just stopped and thinking, this guy must be crazy. I mean, he bumped me or chucked me or something like that. But, and I know what precipitated that because I had worked with Rucker, and Rucker had the IU Kentucky game earlier, and Knight did not like block charge foul. So that's how he thinks. He never forgets anything, I can tell you. Yeah.
Cosgrave said, happy 75th birthday.
Thank you.
Question for you
I'm close to you, 3/4 of a century away.
is, I've read some stuff where officials are getting harder to find.
Oh, yeah.
Is it because of just your travel? Is it because of coaches, of the parents, or?
They don't want to put in the time and the effort anymore. They want to work a year or two and then move to the top. I'm telling you, it's not going to work. That's why you see all the older officials staying there, because they don't want somebody new, because they will not spend the time at it. And it's unfortunate. I mean, I do a lot of assigning in high school, baseball, basketball, college. I'm telling you, you cannot find them. First of all, they don't want to, in baseball, if they work a doubleheader for me in college, they're getting 190 to 230 for a doubleheader. you got a wife and a couple kids at home, she didn't want any part of that. She didn't want to raise that family by herself. So it is harder and harder. And last year in Indianapolis, in baseball, I don't know how many games there was played with one umpire. You could not get them. Could not get them. I mean, it costs money now to get your license, to do all the training. And if they don't go to officiating camps, they're probably not going to get in. And I can tell you that's a racket too, because you go there and you spend your money, and a lot of them don't have the ability to assign you games. Now they have to call me, hey, you know, Jim Leslie, he's pretty good. Why don't you give him a game because he come to my camp? What? I'm not going to do that because I haven't seen him work. And that's the problem. Yes?
Yeah, I did put this in perspective. I officiated IHSAA for about 30 years.
Okay.
You ever make a bad call?
No. Yes. I tell you, and what can a coach say to you? I said, Coach, I missed it. Now, I don't want to say that 3 or 4 times. I won't be in that league. But things can happen. And, you know, don't try to alibi it or make excuses, because now they got video and everything else. I missed it. Yes.
What do you get paid for reffing a Big Ten basketball game?
What do you think?
I've always wondered.
Give me an idea.
400?
Is that for the first 2 minutes? If I were going to Iowa City right now, I'd get 3,000 probably. Wow. Now, you do that about 6 times a week. Most of them don't have another job.
Wow.
And it's pretty lucrative.
So does it vary by where you go?
No, most of your big-time conferences will pay about the same, because it's very competitive for the officials. They're going to go where the bucks are. And a lot of them don't work or anything else, so they can travel, stay out, go on to the next site or something like that. And now, a lot of these coordinators, and I blame them for that, but if you're working at Purdue, tomorrow I might give you a game at IU, then maybe I'll give you a game at Ball State, just back to back to back. Well, you multiply all those up, you're not spending much money, and you're making a lot. But that's why you see some officials get in trouble with the IRS and all. Because, and when I worked in the tournament, there's a gambling statement that you have to fill out. And they do a background check on you, extensive. And I mean, things that come up in a background check, you cannot believe. Now, I didn't have it happen to me, but some of the officials, I mean, you think they're minor, but yet to the NCAA, they're not minor. And there was one guy worked with a lot out of Chicago, and his brother was also an official, not as good as Tommy, but he was decent. Well, he got caught gambling. They suspended Tommy too from, you know, working NCAA basketball and all this and that. It's pretty tough, but it has to be, because there's so many millions of dollars being bet. I mean, when I was growing up, they had no clue where Brookston was, so they couldn't get to me. But, some of these other people. And another thing, you want to stay under the radar. We're not ready. I'll tell you, the FBI comes in and talks to the Division I officials, especially in basketball, and they're giving us tips to not do this, not do that. And they show real films. And what happens maybe after the game, I want to get a drink, so I go in the bar. Now I got to go to the restroom, and there's a couple of floozies sitting there, and somebody puts something in your drink. This is an actual video that the NCAA had. Now, what happens? All of a sudden, you're in the room. Now, somebody else is hiding out in there. Hey, Eric, where's your next game? Notre Dame. Here's what the score needs to be. And that's how you get in trouble. And I'm telling you, there's nothing good can come out of being out late after a game in a bar or anything else, because there's all ears in there. And everybody wants to be an authority. And they hear Eric Harmon say something. That happened to me working the, I'm going to think what game it was. It was, I don't know. Anyway, it was in the Big 8 or Big 12. And we sort of had a lopsided game, and the team that was getting beat, the coach said, you know, let's get this thing going. And I didn't mean a thing about it. I went over to the other coach and said, hey, he just wants to get the game moving on and so he can get out here. My commissioner heard me say that. I got suspended for that. Didn't mean a thing about it. I was just repeating what the losing coach was saying to the winning coach. You, as an official, you cannot say anything. Not because somebody's going to misconstrue what you say, and then they're going to turn it around. And everybody is jealous of an official or anybody else that's, you know, moving up on TV or this or that. Anything they can do to make them look better and you to look worse, they're going to do.